Hello and welcome to the Clashing of Steel. So today I'm talking a bit more about the matchmaking. Now that I have found a little time to play every now and then, I finally have found few more problems with the matchmaking. Many of you have probably encountered these problems on the lower and higher tiers. This match that I'm playing here is a great example what can be a awful matchmaking. It may not always be affected by team balance, but these opponents here do have more melee infantries than we do. This type of matchmaking doesn't happen too often with me, at least not lately. Perhaps more when it was in the closed beta. But every now and then this type of a match happens. And it seems to be a loss more often to the side who has more ranged units and not enough melee infantries to defend those ranged. So these type of matches seem to be thrown together randomly. It doesn't always have to be archers. There can be some other unit type that there is a lot of. Let's say for example one team has 5 spearmen, other has 4 swordsmen. That already is a huge unbalance. Spearmen are great at defending, they're great at taking down cavalry. While the swordsmen on the other hand are reasonable against the cavalry, but they don't have such effect as the spearmen do. Plus, their units cannot be formed as wide, so they can't be used to defend the bottleneck areas as well. To be honest, one of the worst matches I had back in the closed beta was when I was playing cavalry. Our team had like 5 or 6 cavalry players, and the opponents had like 4 or 5 spearmen players. We ended up losing because cavalry just couldn't do anything. As there aren't this many unbalanced matches lately, there are still some that may appear. Although the matchmaking has gone better since the open beta or the first batch after the open beta, it is still not perfect. Another problem we can count is the tier difference. As it takes really heavy effect on the lower tiers, the unbalance on the higher tiers is still very significant, don't get me wrong there, but just it seems to take heavier effect when, let's say example, tier 5 is against tier 6. Best example here would be any tier 5 sword infantry fighting against tier 6 armored legionnaires. That is like a whole new class of engagement. As plus minus 1 tier balance usually doesn't bother me because I can still be effective against 1 tier higher opponents. But when opponents are 2 tiers higher, the dynamic of the game changes rapidly. The change is really huge. And putting certain tier 5 units against tier 6s, the change is already huge. And putting them tier 5s against tier 7s is just poor matchmaking. One of the biggest problems I've encountered is that your team doesn't have enough tier balance. Meaning that if your team has like 1 tier 7, a lot of tier 6s and maybe 1 tier 5, and the opponents happen to have like 4 tier 7s and everyone else is tier 6. I have still countered this problem a couple of times since the open beta. Back when it was in the closed beta, this problem happened so many more times. But it is still somewhat taking its effect. Those types of matches are really unfair towards one team. Another unfair thing that I have seen lately is that one team has catapult, light artillery, and the opponents just have melee infantry and cavalry. Sometimes they do get archers, but usually there is still some form of unfairness. Because when catapult is set against melee infantries, especially the swordsmen, which are an excellent target for the catapults, perhaps that lonely catapult can even destroy opposing ranged units. Sometimes even comparing light artillery and heavy artillery. Light artillery is a bit more agile and requires a lot of repositioning, while the heavy artillery is usually a bit more stationary. And often enough, the heavy artillery can just counteract or harass the light artillery. That is probably that the light artillery requires a bit more teamwork to make him work properly, while the heavy artillery can just set himself up and perhaps even if he has 1 melee infantry, defend himself. These are like the main problems we face. But I'm guessing that everybody's got on their minds the elephant problem. Or perhaps the elephant balance. The worst matches are where you get mixed up with elephants. You get mixed up so badly that you are tier or 2 tiers lower, and the opposing team only has elephants, and you're playing melee infantry, and your team has no viable counters. That is like one of the worst situations. One of the worst ways you can be matched up. If both teams have elephants, there is some form of balance. But it is still somewhat unbalanced if both teams don't have counters. Elephants countering elephants can be a solution, but often enough the elephants are too far from each other and they are needed to support in that area where they're currently at. There are several ways to counter elephants, several unit types, but there isn't a proper defensive solution by my opinion. Well, I don't want to do the elephant hate speech here, but there is a lot that needs to be done with them. I'm sure we all have our own opinions how and what should be done with them. And I'm sure my opinion would go something like gasoline mixed with fire. Perhaps not that extreme, but my opinions would make elephants a lot more tactical than they are right now. Well, since the game is in the open beta, and it is still in the beta, hopefully the matchmaking will be improved. And now that I have had time to play some matches, see some heavy unbalance, some reasonable balance, I have to say that it is still better than it was in the closed beta, where so many matches seem to be thrown together at random. So this is pretty much it about the matchmaking problems. I'm sure I may have missed one or two, but these are just the main ones. Main conflict points. The unbalance between teams, unbalance between unit types, tiers and so. The biggest unbalancing usually happens when there aren't enough players. For example, the night or the morning time. People may be at work or asleep, and that is where the biggest amount of unbalancing happens. When there aren't enough players suitable for your team. Well, anyways, don't forget to subscribe and thanks for watching.